A Saturday morning in late spring. Somewhere just outside Atlanta, sunlight spilled across the lawns of the Oakmont estate, painting the white columns gold. Laughter, perfume, and nervous hope filled the bridal suite where Danielle Morgan stood, motionless for a moment in front of a long mirror. She hardly recognized herself. In the reflection was a woman in white silk with trembling hands and eyes that dared not blink for fear of missing a second. "Stand tall, baby," Regina Morgan whispered as she pinned the last stubborn curl. "This is your moment. You earned every bit of it." Danielle tried to smile, but the nerves fluttered in her chest. The suite was packed. Brianna, her little sister, couldn't stop dabbing tears. Her best friend Kendra hummed as she straightened Danielle's veil. Jasmine fixed a stray eyelash and grinned. Every cousin, aunt, and grandmother in the Morgan family seemed to have squeezed inside, each one offering a prayer, a compliment, or a gentle warning about not tripping down the aisle. Somewhere downstairs, guests filed into rows of white folding chairs. Every seat was filled. Even as excitement mounted, Danielle couldn't ignore a faint, familiar tension under the surface. She remembered the first visit to Oakmont, the long pause as the manager, Heather Collins, greeted the Morgans at the door, the sideways glances from staff when Clarence Morgan, in his Sunday best, handed over the deposit check. It was always the same, in hotels, in restaurants, even in wedding venues. Polite, polished, but never quite welcoming. But she had brushed it aside. This was her day, and nobody would take it away. The clock on the mantel ticked toward noon. Danielle pressed her palms together, breathing slow and steady, waiting for Latrice's call to head down for photos. "5 minutes, y'all," called the wedding planner from the hall. "Let's get the bride lined up." The room broke into happy chaos. Shoes were buckled, bouquets handed out, and tissues tossed into the trash. Brianna looped her arm through Danielle's. "You ready to show 'em what a Morgan wedding looks like?" She grinned. Danielle nodded, unable to speak. For one shining second, the nerves faded, replaced by pure joy. She squeezed her mother's hand, straightened her shoulders, and stepped into the hallway, her train trailing behind her like a cloud. She made it only halfway to the garden doors. Standing in front of the glass, blocking the sun, was a man built like a wall, Derek Palmer, head of security. His blue jacket strained at the seams. He had that look some men get when you've already ruined their day just by existing. Danielle felt it instantly, a familiar chill that went all the way to her bones. She kept her voice steady. "Excuse me, I need to get outside for the ceremony." Derek didn't move. "Sorry, ma'am. This entrance is for staff and approved personnel only." Danielle's heart skipped. She tried to smile, gentle but firm. "I'm Danielle Morgan, today's bride." He barely glanced at her. "Can I see your ID?" "My ID?" Her voice wavered. "Sir, I'm in a wedding gown. My family's out there. We booked this place a year ago. My name should be everywhere." "I need to see identification," he repeated, unblinking. The hallway buzzed with activity behind her, bridesmaids laughing, cousins hurrying past. Danielle's cheeks burned. She looked down, clutching the bouquet so tightly her knuckles went white. I left my purse upstairs. You can call the manager, Heather Collins. She'll vouch for me." He shook his head. "Until I confirm with management, I can't let anyone through." Panic flared. Danielle glanced through the glass. She could see rows of white chairs, the first guests already seated, Nathaniel Reed's mother, Claudette, talking with her father, Clarence, in the front row. Somewhere in the distance, the soft sound of a string quartet tuning up floated through the air. She tried again, her voice trembling now. "This is my wedding. My family is waiting. Please let me through." He didn't budge. "Ma'am, step aside, please. I have my orders." It didn't feel real. The laughter and excitement in the hallway, the sunlight, the flowers, now all seemed far away, as if she'd slipped behind a pane of glass and couldn't be heard. Danielle turned back, eyes brimming. Brianna rushed to her side, anger flashing in her face. "What's wrong?" "He won't let me out," Danielle choked out. "He says I need ID. He doesn't believe me." Brianna's mouth dropped open. "You see the dress, don't you? She snapped at the guard, voice loud enough to turn heads. He ignored her. Danielle tried to swallow her shame, blinking back tears. Don't. Not here. They'll say we're causing a scene, she whispered to her sister. She fumbled for her phone and texted Latrice Miller. Blocked at the door. Security says I need ID. Please help. No answer. She tried Heather Collins, the manager. The call went straight to voicemail, each minute stretched out, heavier than the last. The music outside grew louder, the murmur of the crowd more restless. Inside the suite, her mother, Regina, was already out the door, marching toward the commotion. She planted herself in front of Derek Palmer, eyes blazing. "That's my daughter," she said, voice low but strong. "Let her outside." He stood firm, gaze sliding right over her. "I can't do that, ma'am. I need to verify her identity first." Clarence Morgan, ever the peacemaker, arrived moments later. "Sir, is there a problem? We paid for this venue. We've spoken with Heather. You've seen us here for 2 days of setup." Derek only repeated, "I need to speak with management." Danielle felt trapped, caught between fury, humiliation, and the sense that all the work, all the planning, all the dreaming might be for nothing. She stared down at her dress, the careful beadwork, the ivory train her grandmother Dorothy had sewn by hand. She remembered every shift Clarence had worked at the plant, every corner Regina had cut to save for this moment. She thought of Nathaniel, the man waiting for her at the altar, the man who had built his own empire from nothing, who had insisted that today the Morgans deserved nothing less than the best. She wondered what he would do if he saw her like this. From the other side of the glass, guests started to notice. Phones came out, first in confusion, then concern. The whispers spread. "Isn't that the bride? Why won't they let her out?" Back in the suite, Brianna was already on the phone with the wedding planner, her voice low but urgent. "You need to get up here, right now." Meanwhile, down in the catering kitchen, Stephen Clark, the chef, and his crew prepped appetizers. They glanced up at the security monitors and saw the growing standoff in the hall. "That doesn't look good," Stephen muttered. In the parking lot, a black SUV pulled up. The back door opened and Nathaniel Reed stepped out, sunglasses flashing in the sunlight, crisp navy suit immaculate, calm as ever. He paused, checking his phone. One text from Danielle. "Security issue. Stuck inside." He frowned and dialed her number. No answer. Inside, Danielle's hands shook. The air was thick with shame and disbelief. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She saw her mother's face, anger and heartbreak mixing in the lines around her eyes. And still Derek Palmer stood firm. That was when the distant rumble started. It was faint, a vibration more than a sound, but it grew with each passing second. Heads turned as the noise built, a deep, insistent thump, thump, thump that rolled in over the trees. Someone in the crowd pointed upward, and every eye in the garden lifted to the sky. High above the estate, a gleaming black helicopter sliced through the clouds, circling once before beginning its slow, dramatic descent toward the lawn. Brianna glanced at Danielle, hope flickering in her eyes. He said he'd make sure nothing ruined today, not even this. Danielle watched, heartbeat wild, as the helicopter's landing skids touched down. Grass swirled, skirts fluttered, and guests stumbled back, stunned. The door opened, and Nathaniel Reed stepped out, his silhouette framed against the sky. He walked with purpose, calm, regal, and utterly unbothered by the chaos. As he approached the entrance, Derek Palmer's hand hovered over his radio, suddenly uncertain. Nathaniel met Danielle's eyes through the glass, his face unreadable. He took one look at the security guard, then at Danielle's parents, then at his own mother, Claudette, who stood now with tears in her eyes. Without breaking stride, Nathaniel spoke, his voice clear as thunder. "Open the door," Derek stammered. I have to verify." Nathaniel's gaze cut him off. "That is my bride. This is her day. Either open the door or I'll make sure everyone in Atlanta knows what kind of welcome you offer here." A beat of silence. Then, quietly, someone, maybe it was Latrice, Maybe it was Rachel Morris, the event coordinator, slipped past and released the latch. The door swung wide, and Danielle stepped out at last, the sunlight falling full on her face. She was shaking, but she was standing. Nathaniel took her hand, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Nobody keeps you from me. Not today, not ever." The crowd erupted in applause, tears, and cheers, mingling with the fading echo of helicopter blades. But even as she took Nathaniel's arm and walked toward the altar, Danielle knew. The world was watching, and this story, the story of the door, the guard, the bride, and the billionaire groom, was just beginning. Danielle barely heard the applause. She stepped out into the warm air, clutching Nathaniel's arm so tightly that her fingers left creases in his suit jacket. It was everything she had dreamed, the sky, the flowers, the faces of everyone she loved, but the shame and anger still burned beneath her skin. She felt exposed, like every eye was fixed not on her happiness, but on the spectacle that had unfolded at the door. Nathaniel's hand tightened around hers. "You're here. That's all that matters," he murmured. "Don't let them see you rattled." But Danielle couldn't shake the image. Derek Palmer's immovable face, the manager's cold absence, the way her family, her mother, her father, her little sister, had been forced to plead, to prove, on her own wedding day. She tried to focus as the ceremony coordinator, Rachel Morris, rushed forward, face flustered and voice barely above a whisper. "We're ready to begin if you are." Danielle nodded, finding her footing. The crowd's mood was uneasy. Some guests wore expressions of confusion, others of outrage. A few phones were out, recording, no longer for wedding memories, but as witnesses to what everyone sensed was a kind of injustice. At the front row, Regina wiped away angry tears with a lace handkerchief. Clarence, stoic as ever, put a hand on her shoulder. "Let's give them a day to remember," he said quietly. Dorothy Morgan, Danielle's grandmother, sat straight-backed and regal, eyes closed as if in silent prayer. For a moment Danielle caught her gaze, and Dorothy gave her a slow, solemn nod. "You carry us all," that look seemed to say. The processional music began. Jasmine Lee, the youngest cousin, led the flower girls. Brianna squeezed Danielle's hand one more time before stepping out as maid of honor. Each family member walked with dignity, but Danielle could feel the tension radiating from every seat. The guests' whispers rustled louder than the breeze. "Did you see the guard block her? Would they have stopped someone else? I never thought I'd see that here." On the terrace, Nathaniel stood waiting, posture tall and unshakable. If he felt any anger, it didn't show on his face, only a fierce, unwavering pride as he watched Danielle approach. Their eyes met, and in that gaze Danielle found her anchor. The ceremony itself unfolded in a blur, vows exchanged through tears, promises made with trembling voices. When Nathaniel slid the ring onto Danielle's finger, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something, an apology, an explanation, or perhaps just a moment of peace. When the officiant announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the crowd erupted, but the applause sounded different, less like celebration, more like defiance. As Nathaniel and Danielle walked down the aisle, flower petals fluttering in their wake, they heard a new sound, a murmur rising among the guests. Someone from the back shouted, "We love you, Danielle," and the tension broke, at least for a moment. But as they rounded the corner, leaving the crowd behind, Danielle felt the tears start. Nathaniel pulled her close, brushing his lips against her forehead. "You did it," he whispered. "They can't take this from us." Inside the manor, the atmosphere was electric. Latrice Miller, the wedding planner, rushed up in a flurry of pink chiffon and nerves. "I am so sorry," she blurted, hands wringing. "I stepped away for 5 minutes to check on the cake delivery and came back to chaos. I had to practically beg Heather Collins to let you out. I've never seen anything like this." Danielle shook her head, wiping her eyes. "It's not your fault. She trailed off, unable to articulate the hurt, the exhaustion, the weight of 1,000 small indignities pressed into this one perfect, ruined moment. Regina arrived a second later. arms wide. "Baby, don't you ever let them see you cry. Not today. Not after all we've been through." Her voice was steel, her embrace pure comfort. Curtis Morgan, Danielle's uncle, marched over, anger barely contained. "That guard's still out there like nothing happened. If it were my child." His words trailed off, but the implication was clear. At that moment, Heather Collins, the venue manager, appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, expression pinched. "Mrs. Morgan, Mr. Reed, can I have a word?" Nathaniel turned, cool and collected. "You can speak in front of my wife and family." Heather's tone was brittle, practiced. "I apologize for any misunderstanding earlier. Our staff are trained to follow security procedures for all guests. We strive to provide a safe environment." Danielle stared at her, barely able to speak. "Do your procedures usually include locking out the bride?" Heather's lips tightened. "I can assure you there was no malice intended. With high-profile events, we have to be cautious." Nathaniel's eyes were cold. "Cautious with whom? The people who paid for your entire year's budget?" Heather paled. "If there's anything we can do—" "There is," Nathaniel cut in. "I want that guard removed for the rest of the day, and a written apology for my wife and for my in-laws, or we walk. And believe me, everyone will know why." Heather hesitated, then nodded, retreating as quietly as she'd come. For a moment, it was silent. Then laughter burst out, raw, cathartic, the kind that comes only after the worst has passed. Kendra, Jasmine, Brianna all hugged Danielle at once. "Girl, you broke the internet," Jasmine joked, holding up her phone. "This is already blowing up." Indeed, the incident had been caught from multiple angles. A bridesmaid's live video, a cousin's Instagram story, a guest's Facebook post. Within an hour, hashtags started trending locally. "Let the bride in." "Morgan wedding." "Oakmont blocked bride." Downstairs in the kitchens, Chef Stephen Clark listened as his staff murmured about what had just happened. "I told you that security guy was on a power trip," one line cook said. Stephen frowned, unsure of what to do. "Just keep the food coming," he muttered, glancing toward the door. Out in the garden, the guests were abuzz. Conversations swirled around every table, some guests outraged, others simply shocked. Claudette Reed, Nathaniel's mother, took the microphone during the reception and spoke with a quiet, commanding authority. "I have known the Morgan family since my son brought Danielle home for Thanksgiving. Never in my life have I seen a woman show more grace under pressure. Today I watched as my future daughter-in-law was forced to prove who she was in a room she paid to fill. I watched my son step up as I always knew he would. So let us raise a glass, not only to love, but to dignity, to resilience, and to never backing down." The crowd roared, toasts rose, and for a while it felt like celebration had triumphed after all. But in quiet corners, old wounds lingered. Regina found Danielle by the window, watching the sun set over the gardens. "I am so proud of you," she said softly, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "It's not fair, and I wish you never had to see the world like this. But you held your head high, and you kept walking. That's all any of us can do." Danielle nodded, wiping another tear. "I just wanted today to be perfect." "It was," Regina said, holding her tight. "Not because they let you through that door, but because you never needed their permission in the first place." The rest of the evening carried on, full of music, dancing, and joy. But the story of what happened at Oakmont was already out in the world, growing with every retelling. Later, as Danielle and Nathaniel slipped away from the reception to catch their breath, Nathaniel cupped her face in his hands. "Next time someone tells you where you don't belong, you tell them you belong anywhere you choose." Danielle smiled, strength returning to her eyes. "As long as you're by my side, I will." Above them, the stars began to come out, bright and watchful, and somewhere beyond the walls of the estate, the world waited for the rest of the story. Inside the Oakmont staff office, tension snapped the air. Derek Palmer paced a tight circle near the monitors, his jaw clenched. Heather Collins, red-faced and breathless, slammed the office door behind her. "I want to know exactly what happened," she demanded, her voice a harsh whisper. "You stopped the bride?" Derek straightened, muscles bunched under his blazer. "She didn't have her ID. The protocol is—" Heather cut him off. "Protocol is for strangers, not clients in wedding gowns. You think she just wandered in here off the street?" Her voice rose, then lowered again as she glanced at the younger staffers crowding the doorway, all wide-eyed and silent. Rachel Morris, the event coordinator, spoke up from her corner. "We all saw her at rehearsal. This could be very bad for us. You know who her husband is, right? The Reed Foundation? That's half our donor list." Derek's ears burned. He wasn't new to security work, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this. In the old job, at the country club, he'd been told to err on the side of caution. Here, he'd done exactly what was expected. Why did it feel wrong now, with the weight of 1,000 eyes online? In his gut, a flicker of regret started to grow. "I did what I was told," he muttered. "Maybe I could have handled it different." Heather shook her head. "We need a statement. I want you off the main floor for the rest of the evening. And Derek, next time, try to remember whose day it is." Rachel checked her phone again. Notifications pinged faster than she could swipe. The wedding hashtag was trending. Comments poured in, outrage, support, and warnings from people who'd seen similar things before. She could already picture the email from Oakmont's owners. "Please explain why our venue is being dragged on the internet by every news outlet from Atlanta to New York." Out in the garden, clusters of guests gathered, still buzzing with emotion. Some whispered in outrage, others tapped furiously at their phones, their faces lit by the blue glow of the latest viral video. An older couple at table 7 recalled a time they'd been stopped in a luxury store, eyed with suspicion for no reason but skin tone and style. "It never ends," the woman murmured, squeezing her husband's hand. Inside the bridal suite, Danielle finally allowed herself to sit, the train of her dress spilling over the antique settee. Regina knelt beside her, brushing sweat from her brow. "You did nothing wrong, you hear me? This was their mess, not yours." Danielle nodded, but the pain lingered. "All I wanted was a moment, one day without having to fight for my place." Clarence joined them, wrapping his arms around his daughter and wife. "You remember what I told you, Danny? When you were little and you won that essay contest, and the teacher said she didn't expect it from you?" Danielle sniffed. "I remember." "You smiled, thanked her, and walked up there anyway. That's what you did today. Nobody gets to take that from you." Brianna plopped down at Danielle's feet. "The internet's on your side, sis. People are fired up." Danielle let out a shaky laugh. "Maybe I'll finally get my 15 minutes of fame, huh?" In another corner of the house, Nathaniel's phone rang. It was his lawyer, voice clipped and urgent. "Nate, your wedding's all over social. Reporters are calling. You want to make a statement, or do you want us to handle it?" Nathaniel glanced at Danielle, surrounded by family, her eyes weary but still shining. "Tell them my wife handled it with more grace than I ever could. This is a day for joy, not headlines." The lawyer chuckled. "Got it, I'll run point." Meanwhile, at the catering station, Stephen Clark and his crew worked silently. Stephen felt torn. He'd seen the commotion on the monitors, heard the stories. The staff was divided, some angry, some embarrassed, others just hoping it would all blow over before their next paycheck. "Let's do our jobs right," Stephen said finally. "That's all we can control." Back in the suite, Jasmine Lee scrolled through TikTok, gasping. "Look, there's you, Danielle, 17,000 views and counting." Danielle looked away, not wanting to see herself crying, not wanting to relive that walk to the door. Kendra sat on the arm of the sofa, squeezing Danielle's shoulder. "You know, when Nate told us he was planning something special for the wedding, I thought it was gonna be like doves or a horse-drawn carriage. Never figured he'd have to land a helicopter just to get you outside." That finally drew a genuine laugh from Danielle, a bright, ringing sound that broke the tension in the room. For a minute, they were all just friends, not the subject of a social storm. But as the laughter faded, Regina's eyes met Danielle's, and in that glance was a world of history. You know this ain't new. We fought to get here and we'll keep fighting. But look around, baby. This is your family. This is love. They can't put a wall between you and joy unless you let them. Danielle breathed in, steadying herself. Then I won't let them. Not now. Not ever. Downstairs, Latrice Miller huddled with Heather Collins. You need to do better, Latrice said, her patience worn thin. You know how hard my clients work for these moments. We don't pay for suspicion. We pay for service. Heather looked cornered. I'll write the apology. I'll comp the extra hour. Just keep this quiet if you can. Latrice shook her head. This isn't going away quietly. You better pray the Morgans and Reeds are feeling generous. As dusk settled over the gardens, Danielle slipped away from the dance floor to find Nathaniel alone on the terrace. He looked out over the lawns, face lit by the last rays of the sun. She slid her hand into his. Did you ever think our wedding would end up in the news? He smiled, soft and rueful. I figured you'd be unforgettable, but I was hoping for a quieter headline. They stood together in silence for a long time, watching as the staff packed away tables. Guests laughed over the wedding cake, and the music drifted across the grass. Finally, Nathaniel turned to her. Remember that night in D.C., the gala, when they told you the coat check is for guests only? Danielle laughed, the sound bittersweet. You nearly tore the lobby apart. He kissed her forehead. I told you then, anywhere you go, I go. Anyone tries to shut you out, they shut me out too. That's not just my promise as your husband. That's who I am. Danielle rested her head on his chest. Then let's promise each other no matter what door, what wall, what guard we keep walking. I promise, Nathaniel whispered, holding her close. Back inside, Dorothy Morgan watched her granddaughter through the window, pride swelling in her chest. She remembered her own wedding, a world away, when nobody even let her family use the front door. Now here she was, watching the next generation make history, still fighting, but never backing down. The first stars blinked on, cold and clear, and as the story of Danielle and Nathaniel's day shot across the internet, a new chapter was already being written, one of resilience, of legacy, of doors opened by love and sheer determination. Tomorrow would bring more headlines, more apologies, and more battles. But tonight, Danielle Morgan, bride, daughter, survivor, danced in her husband's arms, surrounded by those who truly knew her worth. And somewhere, out in the world, a young girl watched the videos and realized for the first time that she, too, deserved every door to open. The sun rose over Atlanta with a glare that didn't quite match the mood inside Danielle and Nathaniel's hotel suite. The city was already humming, but inside, it felt strangely quiet, almost suspended, like the day was holding its breath. Danielle sat at the window, still in her silk robe, her phone flashing with notifications. She couldn't keep up. Missed calls, text messages, emails, comments from strangers and friends, and people she'd forgotten she'd ever met. Her face, the image of the bride behind the glass caught at her own wedding, was everywhere. She scrolled through the flood, her hands trembling, trying to find something familiar in the chaos. Each new notification stung a little more. Offers for interviews, requests for statements, hashtags she'd never asked for, but now carried her name. A knock at the door startled her. Brianna poked her head in, hair pulled into a wild puff, eyes puffy but alert. "Mama's downstairs. There's a reporter in the lobby. They want to talk to you." She sent them away, but more keep showing up. Danielle pressed her phone to her chest, drawing a shaky breath. "I'm not sure what to say. I don't even know how I feel." Her voice was hoarse. Brianna crossed the room, plopped onto the edge of the bed. "You don't owe them anything, sis. This was supposed to be your day." She took the phone, glanced at the screen. "Dang, girl, you're everywhere. Grandma's already mad that they spelled your name wrong on the news." A weak laugh escaped Danielle's lips. She wanted to find the humor, but it was buried under the weight of everything. I wanted to wake up happy, she admitted, tears pricking her eyes. The suite door creaked, and Regina entered, coffee in hand. She handed Danielle the mug, then wrapped her in a hug. You are happy, baby. You're married. That's what matters. Everything else we'll handle together. Downstairs, Nathaniel sat with Clarence in the breakfast lounge, surrounded by the low murmur of other guests. Nathaniel's phone vibrated constantly. Every time he silenced it, another alert took its place. Clarence watched him carefully. You all right, son? Nathaniel nodded, forcing a smile. I'm fine. Just didn't plan on waking up to a PR crisis. Not like this. Clarence shook his head. You did right by her yesterday. You always do. They'll try to turn this into a circus, but you're her family now. We protect our own. Nathaniel set the phone aside. That's the plan. I want her to feel safe. I want her to remember the good, not just the headlines. Their words hung in the air as Danielle and Brianna joined them at the table, tension loosening just a bit as the family circled the wagons, leaning into each other for comfort. Outside, the world spun faster. At Oakmont Estate, Heather Collins sat in her office, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, staring at her inbox. There were already hundreds of messages, cancellation requests, angry complaints, demands for public apologies. The board was on her case. The PR firm she'd never thought she'd need was now her lifeline, and the staff she'd tried so hard to manage was questioning her leadership. She tried to draft an apology to the Morgans, wrote, deleted, rewrote, never quite able to find the words. Derek Palmer sat at home, his uniform jacket hung on a hook by the door. He stared at the morning news, watching himself fumble an explanation to a reporter in the parking lot. The shame crawled over his skin. His phone buzzed with messages from friends and old coworkers. Some offered support, others scolded him for getting caught up in something so ugly. He watched Danielle's face over and over on the screen. A part of him wished he could go back and do things differently, but the moment had passed. At the Morgan house, relatives arrived in waves. Some brought casseroles, others their opinions. Jasmine Lee hugged Danielle hard. You trended all night, cousin. TikTok's got your back. Even the mayor commented on one of the videos. Kendra poured a cup of tea, sliding it toward Danielle. You can't fix the world, but you can decide how you show up in it. You handled yourself with more grace than I ever could. Danielle set her phone on the table, covering it with her hand. I just wanted to walk outside and get married. Now it's like the world's peering into our windows. Clarence put an arm around her. Let them watch. You stood tall. That's what matters. Regina nodded, her eyes fierce. This isn't the first time, and it won't be the last. But you didn't let them ruin it. That's what every little girl who sees this will remember. Nathaniel listened, face composed. Later, as evening fell and the family finally had a moment to themselves, he and Danielle sat on the porch, the city's lights flickering beyond the trees. Do you regret it? Danielle whispered. Nathaniel shook his head. Not for a second. If I had to land that helicopter again, I'd do it every day for you. She smiled through the tears. It's not just the guard, or the manager, or the venue. It's every time someone questions if we belong. Nathaniel took her hand. We belong anywhere we choose. This is just the world's way of reminding us to take up space. That night, after the world quieted, Danielle's inbox filled with messages from strangers. Women who had been stopped in stores, families who'd been turned away at restaurants, men who remembered their own daughters' weddings, their pride, and their pain. Each note was a thread in a larger tapestry. Danielle realized she was not alone. As she read a letter from a young girl, her handwriting uncertain, her words brave, Danielle felt her sorrow ease into something steadier. Dear Mrs. Morgan, I saw you on the news. You were brave. I want to be brave too. Danielle folded the letter, pressing it to her heart. For the first time since the door closed, she felt the power in her story. The calls from the venue grew more urgent. Heather Collins offered a full refund, a public apology, and a pledge to start a scholarship in Danielle's name. Danielle listened politely, but her voice was steady as she replied, It's not just about us. You need to do better for every family. Heather promised change, but Danielle knew change would take more than words. Nathaniel helped her draft a letter of her own, posting it online in her voice, not as a victim, but as a woman determined to turn pain into progress. Her words spread quickly, picked up by news outlets, shared by activists, reposted by friends. Within hours, the conversation shifted from outrage to action. Not everyone supported her. Some messages dripped with anger and accusation. Nathaniel tightened security, refusing to let hate shape their lives. "Cowards hide behind screens," he told her. "We face the world together." Danielle leaned on her circle, her mother, her sister, her best friends, drawing strength from every story shared, every hand held. They spent evenings at home, cooking, laughing, remembering the moments that truly mattered. The vows, the dancing, the family gathered together against the odds. Days later, the venue board requested a meeting. Danielle, Nathaniel, Regina, and Clarence sat across from Heather and her colleagues, the air thick with apology and promises. Danielle listened, arms folded. "Don't just fix it for us. Fix it for everyone who comes after." Nathaniel, calm but forceful, demanded real policy changes and a scholarship for local students. By the end of the meeting, Oakmont's owners agreed. The public apology went live that night, and the first scholarship in Danielle's name was announced at a press conference. As the weeks passed, Danielle was asked to speak at colleges, to sit on panels, to share her story with brides, business owners, and community leaders. She spoke with honesty and humility, her voice growing stronger each time. Nathaniel cheered her on, proud to see her light spread. At home, things were quieter. Regina planted flowers in the backyard. Brianna chased her own dreams. Clarence watched his grandchildren with pride. Dorothy Morgan, watching the news from her living room, sent Danielle a card. "The world is spinning your way, baby. Keep walking." Months later, Danielle was invited back to Oakmont, not as a client, but as an honored guest. The doors swung open at her approach. No hesitation, no challenge. Inside, a group of young women waited, eager to learn from the woman who'd turned one locked door into a key for many. As Danielle took the stage, she glanced at Nathaniel in the crowd. He nodded, smiling, eyes shining with pride. She began to speak, her voice carrying across the room, not just for herself, but for every person who'd ever had to fight to belong. This was only the beginning. Night fell over Atlanta, long after most stories fade from memory, but for Danielle and Nathaniel, the world had only gotten louder. Even as the heat from the first wave of headlines cooled, there was a new, deeper hum, a current in the city's veins. The door that wouldn't open was now a story that wouldn't close. In the first months, Danielle learned what it meant to be a symbol. Some days it felt powerful, her inbox filling with invitations, her voice requested for panels, her story recited in classrooms and sermons. Other days, it was exhausting. At the grocery store, strangers stopped her for selfies, whispered their own stories of being locked out. At church, the choir director winked from the pulpit. "We've got royalty in the house today." Danielle smiled for them all, even as it chipped away at her privacy, her sense of self. "They're proud of you," Nathaniel would remind her, but some nights she'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was more headline than human. Nathaniel's business soared in the aftermath. Investors called him a role model. Old friends reached out, eager to align themselves with the Reed name. But not everyone in Atlanta celebrated their success. One afternoon, Nathaniel found hate mail in the company mailbox, anonymously typed, "venomous and crude." He read it once, then shredded it, refusing to show Danielle, but she felt the weight. "Don't hide the bad from me," she told him. "We go through everything together. That's the promise we made." He nodded, pulling her close. "I just wanted one thing in your life to be easy." She kissed his cheek, soft but determined. "Nothing worth having ever is." At family dinners, the conversation would swing between laughter and debate. Curtis Morgan relished the chance to play community leader, pushing for Danielle to run for something, as if notoriety was now destiny. Regina pushed back, "Let my daughter breathe. She deserves rest as much as recognition." Brianna, never content to stay in the background, started a podcast, interviewing other women with stories of exclusion and triumph. "If they're gonna listen, we might as well tell them what they need to hear," she explained, recording in her bedroom, editing late into the night. Through all the noise, Dorothy Morgan kept her wisdom close, sending Danielle handwritten notes every week. "Keep your spirit. The world will take what it can if you let it." One Sunday afternoon, Danielle and Nathaniel walked through Piedmont Park, disguised under baseball caps and sunglasses, hoping for anonymity. They didn't get far before a young couple stopped them. The woman, nervy and excited, stammered, "You don't know what you mean to us. We're getting married next month. You made us believe we could do it our way." Danielle smiled, her own nerves hidden behind practiced warmth. "You can, you should, make it your own story." They congratulated the couple, posed for a picture, then escaped to a quiet bench under the trees. Nathaniel squeezed Danielle's hand. "You keep changing people, even when you don't try." Danielle shrugged. "Sometimes I just want to be invisible again. Not the locked-out bride, just Danielle." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We'll find ways to hold on to who we are." Later that week, an invitation arrived from a major university. The dean wrote, "We believe your experience is not just a cautionary tale, but a blueprint for change." Danielle hesitated, unsure if she was ready for another spotlight, but Nathaniel encouraged her. "Your story matters, but only if you want to tell it." The university event was packed. Students filled every seat, some lining the walls. The air crackled with anticipation. When Danielle took the stage, she looked out at the sea of young faces, some hopeful, some skeptical, all waiting. Her voice wavered at first, but grew stronger with each word. "The door they closed on me wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who's ever had to explain their worth to get through. We have to build places where nobody needs permission to belong." Applause followed her off stage. Afterward, students lined up, waiting for a chance to share their own stories, or just to thank her. That night, back in the hotel, Danielle felt something shift, a sense that she wasn't just surviving the aftermath, she was shaping it. But the world didn't let up. A viral think piece accused Danielle of seeking attention, monetizing her pain. Old acquaintances crawled out from the woodwork, offering support that was little more than self-promotion. Nathaniel's mother, Claudette, called from New York. "People will try to use you, baby. You have to decide what you want to give." Danielle nodded. "I don't want to be famous. I just want to be free." The tension seeped into their marriage. Nathaniel poured himself into work, building new partnerships, fielding calls, giving interviews about leadership and equity. Danielle felt alone in the house some nights, the silence pressing in from every side. Arguments flared over dinner plans, over who would answer the next reporter's call, over whether they should accept an invitation to a gala in D.C. Each disagreement ended with the same realization. This story had changed them, but not broken them. They started seeing a counselor at Claudette's urging. The therapist listened as Danielle poured out her fears. "What if this is all I'm ever known for? What if the world stops listening before real change happens?" Nathaniel's answer was steady. "You're more than this. To me, you're everything." The counselor smiled gently. "The only way forward is together." In the quiet, Danielle reached for Nathaniel's hand, her resolve returning. Meanwhile, the Oakmont estate tried to repair its image. The scholarship in Danielle's name made headlines. Other venues called, asking her to consult on inclusivity and anti-bias training. She agreed carefully, choosing only those who wanted real change, not just good press. She sat with wedding planners, security teams, and hospitality managers. Some listened intently, scribbling notes. Others nodded, polite but dismissive, eager to move on. Danielle learned to spot the difference. After one long meeting, a young staffer caught up to her outside. "My mom was turned away from a country club once," she confessed, voice small. "Thank you for saying what I can't." Danielle hugged her, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes small shifts matter most. The family gathered at the Morgan house for Sunday dinners, now larger and louder than ever. Jasmine brought new boyfriends. Brianna streamed the podcast live. Clarence held court in the kitchen, teasing everyone, refusing to let the weight of the world drown out laughter. One evening, Dorothy brought out an old photo album. She pointed to a black and white picture, her wedding day, standing outside a church in Alabama, her dress handmade, her smile determined. "They wouldn't let us use the front door," she told Danielle, voice unbroken. "Your mama was born 2 months later. You walked through that garden because we kept walking. Remember that." Danielle held her grandmother's hands. "I will. I promise." In the city, activists organized a forum at a historic church. Danielle was asked to speak, but she insisted on a panel. Other brides, business owners, young women who'd faced similar barriers. The stories tumbled out about loan officers who asked for more proof, landlords who lost the application, managers who found excuses to deny opportunity. The crowd swelled with energy. A high school girl raised her hand. "How do you keep believing you belong?" Danielle answered honestly. "Some days you don't. But then someone else holds the door and you remember you're not alone." A reporter from a national magazine attended the forum. Her article ran under the headline, "A New Kind of Southern Belle." Danielle bristled at the label, but when she read the piece, she realized it was about more than her. It was about every woman who'd ever had to fight for a seat at the table. Nathaniel surprised Danielle with a weekend getaway, just the two of them, no phones, no headlines. On a quiet stretch of South Carolina beach, they walked barefoot at dawn, their laughter echoing against the surf. Danielle tossed a seashell into the waves. "For luck," she said, grinning. Nathaniel wrapped his arms around her. "For us." They watched the sunrise, the world briefly their own. Back in Atlanta, life returned to its rhythms. Danielle found a new kind of purpose. She wrote op-eds, collaborated with other advocates, even began planning a foundation to support young women facing barriers in education and business. She hosted brunches, building networks of support, choosing to build bridges rather than just tell her story. Not every day was easy. She still woke some mornings with a pit in her stomach, bracing for the next wave of attention or the next cruel comment. But she learned to stand tall, to draw power from her family, her friends, and the community that had rallied around her. At the anniversary of the wedding, the Morgans and Reeds returned to Oakmont by invitation as guests of honor at a new scholarship ceremony. The doors swung open for them, wide and waiting. The staff lined up, hands folded, faces open and apologetic. Danielle paused at the threshold. For a moment she remembered the fear, the humiliation, the anger. Then she stepped forward, chin high, her family beside her. Inside, the room erupted in applause. Brianna filmed the moment, laughing through her tears. "Now that's a walk," she joked. Nathaniel kissed Danielle's hand. "You did this." "No," Danielle replied, scanning the crowd. "We did this." Dorothy squeezed her hand. "Keep walking, baby, always." Later, during the reception, a young woman approached Danielle with tears in her eyes. "Because of you, I walked down the aisle last month at a venue my mama said we'd never be allowed in. They treated us like family." Danielle hugged her, heart full. "That's all I ever wanted." As the night wore on, laughter and music spilled across the lawns. The Morgans and Reeds danced, their children and grandchildren circling around them. The world outside, for once, faded into the background. But Danielle knew the story wasn't finished. She'd carry it for the rest of her life. A badge, a lesson, a legacy. Every time a door opened for someone else, she'd know she had helped turn the key. As the family gathered for one last photo, the photographer asked Danielle and Nathaniel to stand at the center. The camera flashed, capturing not just a couple, but a community that had refused to be shut out. And as the stars emerged overhead, Danielle whispered to Nathaniel, "We made it through." He pulled her close, voice soft but fierce. "We always will." Somewhere in Atlanta, a young girl watched the news, eyes shining with hope. And in that moment, another door opened. Quietly, confidently, forever. Year 2 began not with fanfare, but with rain. A spring thunderstorm swept through Atlanta, pelting the city with water that beat the sidewalks until the gutters overflowed. Danielle woke to the sound, sheets tangled around her. Nathaniel already out of bed. The hotel room felt colder than usual, the windows streaked, the city below half hidden in fog. She blinked at the clock. 5 in the morning. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then it came back. Last night's fundraising gala, a speech, applause, the taste of nervousness mixed with pride. She'd stood in front of hundreds, sharing her story again, as if repetition could strip it of its sting. Nathaniel was at the window, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. She could tell from his posture, shoulders tight, back straight, that it was work. Since the wedding, since the helicopter and the headlines, his business had grown beyond either of their wildest dreams. Sometimes she missed the old Nathaniel, the one who left his phone at home on date nights and spent whole Sundays cooking breakfast in his slippers. But she couldn't blame him. The world wouldn't let them be ordinary anymore. She watched the water stream down the glass, thinking about what it meant to be visible, to have her life poured out in public, every detail debated by strangers who only knew her name because she'd been denied a door. It was still surreal. Some days she felt invincible. Other days she was tired, so tired she'd sit in the shower until the water ran cold, praying for a moment of quiet. Her phone buzzed again, emails, notifications, a calendar reminder for an interview she'd almost forgotten. Danielle silenced it. She needed an hour without questions. She wrapped herself in the hotel robe and padded to the kitchenette, making coffee as quietly as she could. Nathaniel turned, catching her eye, and smiled that old soft smile. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "I keep thinking about the panel last night. Did I say the right thing? Did I do enough?" He set his phone down, walked over, wrapped her in his arms. "You were perfect. You were yourself. That's all anyone can ask." She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Sometimes I want to run away from all of it. Just disappear." He kissed the top of her head. "We could. But would you be happy, hiding?" She closed her eyes, picturing another life. A small town, no headlines, mornings that belonged to them alone. Then she let the vision go. "I don't think I could," she whispered. "Not now. Not after everything." He nodded, understanding. "You're stronger than you know." They drank coffee in silence, listening to the rain, letting the city wake up around them. When Danielle finally dressed for the day, she chose a suit, soft blue, the color of calm. She brushed her hair straight, applied mascara with a steady hand, and told herself she was ready. The drive across the city was slow, traffic snarled by the storm. As they passed Oakmont Estate, Danielle caught a glimpse of the gardens through the gates. She remembered walking out onto that lawn, Nathaniel beside her, her family behind her, the applause of strangers who'd become allies in an instant. That day still hovered around her like a second skin, sometimes comforting, sometimes constricting. She arrived at the studio early, met by a young producer with nervous energy. "We're so honored to have you," the woman gushed. "Your story means so much to so many people. I hope you don't mind if I say, I watched that video of you walking through the door at least a dozen times." Danielle smiled, warmth and fatigue blending in her eyes. "Thank you. I hope it helped." The interview itself was gentle, more conversation than interrogation. The host asked about legacy, about change, about what it meant to hold the door for others. Danielle answered honestly, never drifting into sound bites. When the red light blinked off, the host leaned over and whispered, "Thank you for not letting them define you." Driving home, Danielle watched the storm clear. Sunlight broke through, illuminating the skyline. She thought of her grandmother's words, "Keep your spirit," and felt a quiet resolve take root. She would not disappear. She would keep showing up in every room, every conversation, until her presence felt ordinary, not extraordinary. At home, Regina was waiting, arms full of flowers for the spring festival. "Come help me with these, baby," she called, her voice as bright as the bouquets. Danielle shrugged off her jacket, rolled up her sleeves, and let herself be swept up in the ritual of arranging daffodils and tulips for the church. As they worked, Regina told stories about her own wedding, about Dorothy sewing dresses late into the night, about the time she'd been turned away from a department store for looking out of place. Danielle listened, hands deep in petals and stems, grounding herself in the rhythm of family. Afterward, she and Brianna walked to the cafe on the corner, the one with the best sweet potato pie in the city. Brianna, ever the interviewer, pulled out her recorder. "I want to do an episode on what happens after the headlines," she said. "People think it's over once the news moves on, but it's not. Not for us." Danielle sipped her coffee, thoughtful. "It's like the world wants you to stay grateful, stay quiet, but real change is messy. It doesn't end with an apology." Brianna nodded. "That's what I want people to hear. The mess, the work, the hope." They recorded for hours, Danielle opening up about the hardest days, the fights with Nathaniel, the nights she cried alone, the pressure to be perfect for everyone who saw her as a symbol. "Some days I wish I could go back and just be a bride again," she admitted. "But if I had to go through it all over, I would. For you, for Mom, for every girl watching." Brianna hugged her, laughter and tears mingling. "You're more than enough, sis." Back at home, Nathaniel was cooking pasta and garlic bread, his specialty. The kitchen smelled of butter and basil. They ate together, talking about nothing and everything, letting themselves just be. That night, Danielle scrolled through her messages. One caught her eye. A young woman, graduating college, had sent a picture of herself in cap and gown, beaming. "You made me believe I could do it. Thank you," Danielle replied, her heart full. "You did it. I just walked with you for a little while." Days passed, the festival came and went, and Danielle was invited to speak at a national conference in D.C. She hesitated, so much travel, so much time away from home, but Nathaniel urged her to go. "You can't hide your light," he said. "Let them see you." She traveled alone this time, sitting by the window, watching the city recede beneath the plain. In D.C., the conference was buzzing, policymakers, activists, students, all talking about inclusion and progress. Danielle was nervous, more than she wanted to admit. She paced backstage, reviewing her notes, trying to steady her breathing. When her turn came, she stood at the podium, lights hot on her face, and looked out at the crowd. She thought of Dorothy, of the long walk to the altar, of every door she'd opened or been denied. Then she spoke, her voice clear and unwavering. "We talk a lot about access, about opening doors. But what happens after you walk through? The real work begins then. The work of making sure you're not the last, of holding the space for others, of refusing to shrink yourself to fit someone else's expectations. That's what legacy means. Not just getting in, but changing the room for everyone who comes after." The applause was thunderous. Danielle left the stage, trembling with relief and pride. Dozens approached her afterward, students, professors, politicians, each one sharing their story, their gratitude, their hope. Back in Atlanta, the news of her speech spread. Regina, watching from home, wiped away tears. Clarence, always stoic, called Danielle to tell her how proud he was. Brianna replayed the video, quoting her favorite lines for her podcast audience. Nathaniel sent flowers, a note tucked in. "You keep changing the world. I'll keep making dinner." But not everyone was happy. A backlash brewed online. Critics, trolls, old classmates who claimed Danielle was too political now. A rival business owner accused Nathaniel of leveraging his wife's fame for personal gain. The whispers grew louder. Some invitations were rescinded. A corporate sponsor withdrew from the foundation Danielle had launched. Danielle felt the sting, but she refused to back down. "I didn't come this far to let fear stop me," she told Nathaniel. "If people want to walk away, let them. I'll keep going." He nodded, standing beside her. Always. Amid the storm, good news arrived. Oakmont Estate, inspired by Danielle's journey, had become the first venue in the state to be certified for diversity and inclusion training. The scholarship in her name had helped 5 young women attend college, the first in their families. Danielle met them for lunch, laughing and crying as they shared their dreams. One young woman, shy but determined, told Danielle, "You gave me more than money. You made me feel seen." Danielle hugged her, realizing for the first time just how far her story had reached. Summer arrived. The Morgan family gathered for a barbecue, cousins, aunts, uncles, neighbors. Laughter bounced off the porch. Dorothy sat in her rocker, watching her grandchildren play in the yard, her eyes full of wisdom and peace. Danielle pulled up a chair beside her, plate balanced on her lap. "Did you ever think it would be like this?" she asked. Dorothy smiled, shaking her head. "No, baby. I hoped. I prayed. But seeing it, that's a blessing." They watched as Brianna chased the littlest cousins with a water balloon, the children shrieking with delight. Clarence tended the grill, Regina danced with her youngest grandchild, and Nathaniel played spades at the folding table, laughter ringing out. Danielle felt a quiet contentment settle over her. She had been through the fire, scrutiny, judgment, exhaustion, but she had come out whole, surrounded by love. As the sun set, she stood and raised her glass. To family, to walking through every door together. The cheers echoed through the night, loud and sure. In the months that followed, Danielle continued her work, mentoring, speaking, building her foundation. She turned down offers that felt performative, accepted those that aligned with her values. She learned to rest, to protect her peace, to say no. She and Nathaniel traveled more, sometimes for work, sometimes just for them. They learned to find joy in quiet moments, reading together on the porch, cooking new recipes, planting a garden in the backyard. One autumn evening, after a long day of meetings, Danielle received an invitation to speak at the White House. She hesitated, nervous about the attention, but Nathaniel reminded her, "Your voice matters. Don't let anyone make you small." In D.C., Danielle met leaders from across the country. She told her story of the locked door, of the open one, of the journey from pain to purpose. She spoke of legacy, of love, of refusing to shrink. When she finished, the room stood in ovation. Reporters clamored for interviews, but Danielle slipped away, finding peace in a quiet hallway. She called Regina, voice trembling. "I did it, Mama. I made it." Regina's answer was simple, steady. "I always knew you would." Back in Atlanta, Danielle and Nathaniel sat together on their porch, watching the stars. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" she asked. He shook his head, pulling her close. "Never. Every door, every fight, every triumph made us who we are." Danielle nodded, peace blooming in her chest. "Then let's keep going. There are more doors to open." They sat together, the city quiet around them, the future bright and wide. And somewhere, a young girl, inspired by Danielle's story, took her first step toward her own door, knowing at last that she too deserved to walk through. Danielle awoke one morning to the sound of birds, a rare luxury in the heart of the city. Nathaniel was still asleep, arm draped over her waist, his breathing deep and even. She lay still, listening to the world outside, children laughing, delivery trucks rumbling past, the distant chime of a church bell. For a fleeting moment, everything was simple. Then her phone buzzed. Another request for an interview, another invitation to a round table. She silenced it and slipped out of bed, pulling a sweatshirt over her head as she padded into the kitchen. Coffee brewing, she opened the window and let in the cool autumn air. She had a speaking engagement that afternoon, her third this week, but for now, the world could wait. She stood in the quiet, eyes closed, grounding herself in the rhythm of her own breath. Nathaniel joined her, yawning. He kissed her shoulder, then filled 2 mugs. "You ready for today?" he asked. She sipped her coffee. "As ready as I'll ever be. You?" He shrugged. "It's just another meeting, nothing I haven't done before." She smiled, grateful for his calm. "We make a good team," she said softly. He grinned. "Best there is." Later that morning, Danielle drove to a community center on the south side. The hall was already packed when she arrived. Mothers with toddlers, college students, men in union jackets, elders with canes and sharp eyes. The air vibrated with anticipation. Danielle recognized faces in the crowd, former classmates, church ladies, a reporter from the local paper. As she waited to be introduced, she reminded herself, "Speak your truth. That's all you can do." When her name was called, the room erupted in applause. She stood tall, heart pounding, then stepped to the microphone. "I'm not here because I'm special," she began, voice steady. "I'm here because for too long, too many of us have been told to wait in the hallway, to be quiet, to be grateful for crumbs. Well, I'm tired of crumbs, aren't you?" A wave of laughter and applause swept the room. Danielle continued, weaving her own story with those she'd collected from women and men across the city, about barriers broken, opportunities missed, doors that finally swung open. She spoke of Nathaniel, of her family, of Oakmont, but mostly she spoke of what came after, the work, the scars, the healing. When she finished, people lined up to speak with her, some with tears, others with fire in their voices. One man, graying at the temples, pressed her hand in his. "My granddaughter talks about you like you're a superhero. Thank you for making her believe in more." A mother pulled her daughter close, whispering, "See, you can be anything." Danielle's heart swelled with gratitude, but also with the quiet ache of responsibility. She walked to her car as dusk fell, the city lights flickering on, and let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from the weight of all the stories, all the hope she now carried. Back at home, Nathaniel had made dinner, simple, comforting food, fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread. They ate on the back porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool night. He listened as Danielle recounted her day, pride shining in his eyes. "You never give yourself enough credit," he said, gently. "You give people hope." She shook her head. "It's not about me. It's about all of us, finding the courage to walk through when the world says we can't." Nathaniel took her hand, holding it between his own. "You keep the door open for everyone. That's your gift." The next week, Danielle met with her foundation's board. They reviewed scholarship applications, discussed mentorship programs, and debated how to stretch their resources further. One board member, a retired judge, leaned forward. "You could run for city council, you know. People would line up to vote for you." Danielle laughed, shaking her head. "I'm not a politician." The judge smiled. "That's exactly why you should do it." The idea stuck with her. She discussed it with Nathaniel, with Regina, with Brianna. Each offered encouragement, but also cautioned her about the cost, the scrutiny, the loss of privacy, the pressure to be perfect. One evening, Danielle called her grandmother, Dorothy. "Do you think I should run?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "You know who you are, Danielle. If you do it for the right reasons. Not because they want you to, but because you want to." Danielle nodded, understanding. "Thank you, Grandma. I just needed to hear your voice." In the end, she decided to wait. There was still too much to do, too many young women to mentor, too many families to support. She focused on the foundation, on building something that would last beyond her own name. Autumn gave way to winter, and with it came new challenges. Funding dried up as the economy slowed. A trusted friend on the board betrayed Danielle's confidence, leaking private emails to the press. The story blew up overnight, critics twisting her words, questioning her motives, her integrity. Danielle was devastated, the sting of betrayal cutting deeper than any public insult. She withdrew for days, unable to eat or sleep, her spirit battered. Nathaniel sat with her, silent, his presence a steady anchor. Regina came over, bringing soup and soft words. Brianna canceled her podcast for a week, refusing to let her sister face the storm alone. Dorothy arrived, cane tapping against the hardwood, her eyes fierce. She sat on the edge of Danielle's bed and took her hand. "You can let this break you, or you can let it sharpen you. Remember who you are. Remember who you come from." Danielle let the tears fall. "I'm so tired, Grandma. I don't know if I can keep fighting." Dorothy squeezed her hand. You don't have to do it alone. Let your people carry you for a while. That's what family is for. Gradually, Danielle found her footing again. She released a statement, honest, vulnerable, refusing to hide from the truth. I am not perfect. I make mistakes. But I will not let one person's betrayal erase the work we've done together. Support poured in, letters, donations, volunteers offering their time. The board member who'd betrayed her resigned in disgrace. The foundation recovered, stronger than before. As the new year dawned, Danielle felt hope rising again. She celebrated quietly with family and friends, counting her blessings. Nathaniel toasted to new beginnings. Regina led a prayer. Brianna sang, off-key but joyful. Clarence, ever the steady hand, pulled Danielle into a dance, reminding her of all the reasons she kept going. That spring, the foundation launched a new program, providing internships and job training for young women of color. The first cohort was small but determined. Danielle spent hours mentoring them, sharing not just her successes, but her struggles, her doubts, her failures. One young woman, barely 18, confided in Danielle, "I'm scared I won't be enough." Danielle smiled, recalling her own fear. "You already are. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Word spread. More applications came in, more stories, more hope. The program grew, touching lives across the state. Danielle was invited to speak at graduations, to bless new buildings, to lend her name to community causes. But she kept her boundaries, refusing to let herself be pulled in every direction. She learned to say no, to rest, to put her family first. Nathaniel stood by her through it all. Their love, tested and tried, had grown deeper. They traveled when they could, hiking in the mountains, walking hand in hand through city streets, laughing over late-night takeout. One evening, as they watched the sunset from their porch, Danielle turned to Nathaniel. "Do you think we've done enough? That we've made a difference?" Nathaniel wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You changed the world for more people than you know, but you're not finished yet. None of us are." Danielle rested her head on his shoulder, watching the sky turn from gold to indigo. She thought of the doors she'd walked through, the ones she'd held open, the ones still waiting. She knew there would be more storms, more betrayals, more moments of doubt. But she also knew she was not alone. She never would be again. And as the stars blinked to life above Atlanta, Danielle made herself a promise to keep walking, to keep fighting, to keep loving fiercely, no matter what doors lay ahead. Spring pressed forward, and Danielle found herself drawn back to the roots that had always steadied her, her family, her community, the church she'd attended as a child. She returned one Sunday morning, slipping quietly into a back pew, her face half hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The choir's voices rose, filling the sanctuary with a promise of better days. After the service, old friends and strangers alike greeted her, some with tears, others with laughter. An elderly woman grasped Danielle's hands in her own, eyes shining. "You helped my granddaughter get her first scholarship. She's graduating next month. We're all so proud." Danielle felt herself blinking back tears, the meaning of her journey made real in these small, profound encounters. She stayed for the potluck, laughing at stories she'd heard a dozen times before, listening to dreams from children who saw themselves as limitless. Later that day, she sat with Regina and Dorothy at the kitchen table, watching the afternoon sun slant across the floor. Dorothy poured sweet tea, her hands steady as ever. "You know, every generation has its fight," she said quietly. "But I see now that all our fighting was for this moment, so you could have choices I never did. What you do with them, that's your gift to those who come after." Regina squeezed Danielle's hand. "Don't carry the world by yourself, baby. Let others help shoulder the load." Danielle nodded, feeling the strength of the women beside her and the echo of those who'd come before. The burden of expectation was still heavy, but it was softened by love, by the laughter of nieces and nephews running through the house, by the smell of bread baking and the sound of old hymns on the radio. As summer arrived, Danielle's foundation continued to expand. She launched an annual retreat for young women, a weekend of workshops, bonding, and honest conversation. The first event was held in the same garden where she'd been locked out years ago. This time the gates were open and laughter spilled out onto the street. Danielle stood beneath the archway, welcoming each girl by name, remembering her own nervousness on that day. She led sessions on leadership, self-worth, and resilience, but she also listened, truly listened, to the dreams and doubts of each attendee. She saw herself in their questions, their ambition, their vulnerability. One evening, after a campfire where stories and songs had been shared, Danielle walked the grounds alone. The moon hung low, casting silver over the grass. She paused at the spot where she'd once been denied entry, remembering the shame, the anger, the way Nathaniel's arrival had changed everything. This time her heart was light. She whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for the struggle itself, but for the growth it had forced, growth she could now offer to others. Nathaniel joined her, silent and steady. They stood together in the moonlight, neither needing to speak. Their journey had been harder than they'd ever imagined, but it had been theirs, and that made all the difference. As the retreat drew to a close, the girls gathered in a circle. Danielle asked each one to name a door they wanted to walk through, and the promises they'd make to those who followed. Some spoke of careers, others of family, others of justice and change. Their voices rose together, a chorus of hope that seemed to lift the very stars. Danielle closed the circle with a promise of her own. "I will keep showing up for you as long as you need me. I will keep the door open, and I will never let anyone tell you who you are or what you're worth." In the months that followed, Danielle's reputation as a mentor grew. She received letters from across the country, some from women her age, others from girls just starting out. Each letter was a reminder that her story was no longer just hers, but belonged to a wider community, a movement of people who refused to be locked out. Of course, there were still hard days, days when the criticism stung, when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm, when loss and disappointment came without warning. But Danielle faced them with a courage that was hard-earned, forged in the fires of public scrutiny and private pain. Through it all, Nathaniel remained her constant, celebrating her triumphs, holding her through her failures, reminding her that she was loved for who she was, not for what she'd endured. They made space for joy, Sunday dinners with family, impromptu road trips, long walks with no agenda but to be together. Brianna's podcast grew into a community of its own, a place where stories of resilience, heartbreak, and hope were given a platform. Clarence started volunteering at a literacy center, inspired by his daughter's commitment to making a difference. Regina launched a small bakery from home, her cinnamon rolls quickly becoming the talk of the neighborhood. Dorothy continued to offer wisdom and quiet strength, her presence grounding them all. One crisp autumn day, Danielle was honored at a citywide celebration, her foundation now supporting dozens of young women every year. As she took the stage to accept the award, she looked out at the faces in the crowd, family, friends, former scholarship recipients, leaders and children alike. She realized the legacy she was building wasn't measured in headlines or speeches, but in the lives she'd touched, the doors she'd helped to open, the hope she'd inspired. As the ceremony ended, a young girl approached her, wide-eyed and nervous. "Ms. Morgan, do you ever get scared?" Danielle knelt to meet her gaze, her smile gentle. "All the time, but I walk through anyway. That's what courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but moving forward in spite of it." The girl grinned, her uncertainty replaced by resolve. Danielle watched her walk away, feeling the torch pass yet again. That night, as the city glimmered outside their window, Danielle and Nathaniel sat together in quiet reflection. "Are you happy?" Nathaniel asked, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. Danielle nodded, tears of contentment filling her eyes. I truly am," he smiled. "Then we've done something right." They toasted to the future, to love and legacy, to the promise that every door was meant to be opened, not just for themselves, but for all who came after. And in that moment, as Atlanta stretched out before them and the world exhaled, Danielle knew, finally and completely, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye, and yet each season seemed to deepen the story of Danielle and Nathaniel Morgan Reed, not as a couple defined by a single day's injustice, but as architects of something enduring. The city had changed around them, shaped in part by their choices, their voices, and their relentless belief in what was possible. Spring found Danielle in her home office, the walls covered with thank you notes, foundation newsletters, and photographs of smiling scholarship recipients. It was the morning of her annual retreat, a gathering that had grown from a handful of determined girls into a movement, a rite of passage for young women who wanted more from the world than what their mothers and grandmothers had been given. Danielle looked out the window, heart swelling at the sight of minivans pulling up, girls in crisp dresses stepping out, clutching notebooks and hopes. She finished her coffee and called to Nathaniel, who was tying his tie in the hallway mirror. He grinned at her, ever the steady anchor. "Ready for another year?" he teased. She rolled her eyes, but her laughter was bright. "You know I never am, but I always end up grateful." Nathaniel slipped his arm around her waist, pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You got this, Dee. You always have." Downstairs, the kitchen bustled, Regina baking muffins, Brianna reviewing her podcast notes for a live taping later, Clarence loading coolers into the trunk of the family SUV. Dorothy sat at the table, a queen presiding, her voice clear as she issued orders to the cousins and neighbors who'd volunteered. The retreat unfolded with warmth and purpose. The garden was bright with banners, the old archway now a permanent fixture draped with flowers and ribbons. Danielle greeted each attendee by name, her embrace genuine, her encouragement specific. The workshops were practical and bold: financial literacy, public speaking, self-defense, and the art of saying no with dignity. During one breakout session, a girl named Layla stood up, her voice trembling. "What do you do when people say you're not enough?" Danielle thought for a moment, searching the faces around her for a younger version of herself. "I remember who I am. I remember where I come from. And I remind myself that their opinion is not my truth. You decide what's enough, Layla, not them." The applause that followed was thunderous, and Danielle saw relief flicker in Layla's eyes. Nathaniel led a session with the young men who volunteered as peer mentors. He spoke of respect, partnership, and what it means to lift each other up. He was careful never to center himself, always deflecting credit, always holding up the women in his life as the standard to follow. That night, as the girls gathered around a bonfire, Brianna set up microphones for a podcast recording, inviting questions and stories. The air was filled with laughter, song, and moments of brave, aching honesty. Danielle sat back, content, her heart at ease in the chaos. After midnight, she and Nathaniel stole a moment for themselves. They stood at the edge of the garden, arms entwined. The moon was full, the stars bright. Nathaniel squeezed her hand, his voice low. "You did this. Look at them all. Look at what you started." She rested her head on his shoulder. "We did this, all of us." The next morning brought rain, soft at first, then pounding, turning the garden into a sea of umbrellas and muddy sneakers. The girls squealed, running for cover, but Danielle insisted they stay. "You don't stop just because things get messy," she told them, leading them in a dance under the downpour. "You learn to laugh in the rain." By the end of the retreat, the girls had written letters to their future selves, tucked them into a box to be opened the next year. Danielle added her own, the words simple and true: keep walking, keep believing. Don't let the world decide your limits. As the families departed, Danielle hugged Dorothy tightly. The old woman's health was failing, her steps slower, her voice softer, but her mind was sharp as ever. "You're making a mark, child. That's all any of us can hope for." Danielle felt the weight of the blessing, the love and expectation that came with it. In the years that followed, the work deepened. The foundation expanded, new programs for entrepreneurship, mental health, and community organizing. Danielle became a trusted advisor to the mayor, then to the governor. Her voice carried weight in boardrooms and church halls alike. She traveled to Washington, testifying before Congress, her story no longer just a personal narrative, but a blueprint for national policy. Nathaniel grew his business into a regional powerhouse, never forgetting the promises he'd made to use his influence for good. He hired local, mentored young men who needed direction, invested in the neighborhoods that had once felt like afterthoughts to city planners. Brianna's podcast found a national audience. She toured schools and colleges, amplifying voices that rarely made the evening news. Her laughter became a signature, her interviews a source of hope for thousands. Regina's bakery moved out of the house and into a storefront on Auburn Avenue. The community rallied around her, savoring her peach cobbler and her wisdom in equal measure. Clarence volunteered at 3 different literacy programs, finding fulfillment in each new reader's triumph. Dorothy passed quietly one summer morning, her family gathered at her bedside, the radio playing her favorite hymn. Her funeral was a celebration, stories, music, food, and laughter. Danielle gave the eulogy, her voice strong. "My grandmother taught me to open doors, to keep faith, to love fiercely. Her legacy is in all of us." In the weeks that followed, Danielle felt Dorothy's presence everywhere, a whisper in the wind, a warmth in the kitchen, a memory sparking new courage. She carried on, her roots deeper, her purpose clearer. One autumn, a national magazine named Danielle among the most influential women in America. The article chronicled her rise from the bride locked out of her own wedding to a movement leader whose work had transformed lives across the country. Danielle shrugged at the attention, but Nathaniel grinned, pinning the article to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. "You gonna let them write your story?" he teased. She laughed, shaking her head. "No, I'm going to keep writing my own." But not all was easy. Politics shifted. Funding for the foundation was threatened by a change in administration. Old adversaries resurfaced, trying to undermine what had been built. Danielle faced these challenges with the resolve honed over years of public scrutiny. She called in allies, organized fundraisers, met with donors one-on-one. Her persistence paid off, the foundation survived, and new partnerships were forged. The world outside continued to change, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. But the garden at Oakmont, the annual retreat, and the circle of women Danielle had nurtured remained constant. One year, the retreat was attended by a girl named Kennedy. Shy, quick-witted, she reminded Danielle of herself as a child, watchful, skeptical, but hungry for opportunity. Kennedy's family had struggled. Her mother worked nights, her father was gone. But Kennedy had dreams. To be a lawyer, to open her own firm, to never again be told to wait in the hallway. Danielle took Kennedy under her wing, meeting with her monthly, introducing her to mentors, cheering her on through setbacks and triumphs. The bond between them deepened, a reminder that the truest legacy is not in the numbers or headlines, but in the lives quietly, profoundly changed. At Kennedy's high school graduation, Danielle sat with her family, tears shining as Kennedy gave her valedictory address. "I walk through every door," Kennedy said, voice ringing clear, "because someone taught me not to wait for permission." The applause echoed through the auditorium. Danielle hugged Kennedy tightly afterward. "Now you hold the door for someone else," she whispered. Kennedy grinned. "You can count on it." In the years that followed, the Morgan Reed family faced their own storms, illness, loss, moments of doubt and exhaustion. But they held each other up, never letting the world shrink their hope. Danielle and Nathaniel celebrated their 10th anniversary with a trip to Paris. Just the two of them, wandering narrow streets, lingering over coffee, rediscovering the quiet wonder of simply being together. They returned to Atlanta renewed, ready to face whatever came next. On a bright spring day, Danielle hosted the largest retreat yet. Hundreds of girls, women, mentors, and community leaders filled the garden. Laughter and music floated on the breeze. At the closing circle, Danielle looked out at the sea of faces, the new leaders rising in their midst, the future taking shape before her eyes. She spoke softly, her words carrying to every corner of the garden. "We began as a handful. Now we are a movement. You are the legacy. Every time you walk through a door, every time you lift someone else, you honor those who came before and light the way for those yet to come. Never forget, you belong. The cheers were deafening, the tears honest and joyful. As dusk fell, Danielle and Nathaniel strolled the garden, arm in arm. They paused beneath the old archway where it all began, where she had once been stopped and now returned, time and again, triumphant. "Did you ever imagine all this?" Nathaniel asked, wonder in his voice. Danielle shook her head. "I just wanted to get married. I never thought it would lead here, but I wouldn't change a thing." He smiled, pressing his forehead to hers. "Neither would I." As the last lanterns flickered, the last guests departed, Danielle stood alone in the garden, breathing in the scent of jasmine and earth. She felt the presence of Dorothy, of every woman who had ever told her to stand tall. She knew the work would never be finished, but it didn't need to be. Each new voice, each new step, each new open door was a promise. The world could change if enough people believed. And so, as night settled over Atlanta, Danielle walked home, her heart full and her legacy secure, not as a bride locked out, but as a woman who turned a closed door into 1,000 open ones for herself and for all who would follow.